What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today I want to talk to you guys about my favorite microcap company, Where Food Comes From. I made a couple episodes about these guys in the past, kind of, touching on different points of the business model. Wanted to make an overview on why I love this little company from a financial business perspective, and then also why I'm such a big fan of Where Food Comes From a move the needle in terms of climate change and just overall fixing the food system perspective that is super important to me personally, and I think sums up the era of hyperchange. So let's get right into it. So what does Where Food Comes From do? They call themselves an independent third-party verification provider for the food industry. Basically, when you go to the grocery store and you see all of those labels, organic, non-GMO, grass-fed, cage-free, those are the types of claims that Where Food Comes From audits against. Over the past 20 years, the company has been building up a massive moat and portfolio of these services. As of today, they can offer and verify against 50 different standards across a wide range of different products from, crops, leafy greens, pork, beef, chicken, eggs. They have over 13,000 different customers who they're verifying or certifying different claims for. And on top of that, they're working with some of the largest companies in the entire food space to work on auditing their supply chain and making them more sustainable and transparent. A few examples of those are Dannon Yogurt, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They did a pilot program with McDonald's to try and make sustainable beef in Canada. Whole Foods has been one of their largest partners and customers for years. Now, I call their business verification as a service. And I love this business model because once you're a farmer and you're starting to get verified and audited for certain claims, your entire marketing and branding strategy as a company is built on those claims as a part of your product. Where Food Comes From then has to recurringly audit you against those claims. This means the company continually gets revenue each year from the same customers. And as consumers are demanding more and more information about where their food comes from, more and more revenue opportunities lie within each customer. For instance, I said Where Food Comes From audits against 50 standards. Now, instead of just going to the grocery store and buying something that says organic, if you look at the label, there's probably organic claim, non-GMO claim, grass-fed claim. There's more and more of these labels coming on. And that's Where Food Comes From's big advantage, is with such a big portfolio, they can do something called bundling. This means they bundle the services when they come to your farm. Instead of calling somebody up to do an organic audit, someone to do a non-GMO audit, somebody to do a grass-fed audit, and so on and so forth, you can call up Where Food Comes From and they will do all of these audits for you at once for a bundled, cheaper price. So this is the very beginning and simple part of their basic moat. Taking a step back, the company was founded about 20 years ago by John Saunders. He still runs the company to this day. He is the CEO and his wife is the COO, Leanne Sanders. This husband and wife dynamic apparently seems to be working really, really well. Both of them combined owned about 33% of the company. They're heavily invested along with shareholders. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I love Where Food Comes From, is because the incentives with management are exactly aligned. Now, as you can imagine, consumers wanting to know where food comes from has been a growing trend. And Where Food Comes From has been executing and capturing the market opportunity with this rising tide. For instance, revenue has climbed over tenfold in the past decade, from 1.1 million right before they IPO'd in 2006 to 14.5 million in 2017 by my estimates. So yes, the company is still very, very small, but as you can see, the growth rate is really impressive and it doesn't look like it's slowing down. They've been able to compound this revenue growth at 26% over the past 11 years. Let's take a look at the company's gross profit. You'll see that they've also been able to compound this number, and this is a really important metric that I'm looking at for growth stocks who are investing heavily in the future, but still compounding their earnings power. As you can see, Where Food Comes From generated $700,000 in gross profit in 2006. In 2017, by my estimates, they're on pace to generate $7.5 million. This is a 24% compounded annual growth rate over the past 11 years. But now you're probably telling me, wait, but I'm looking at the earnings and it doesn't look like much of this growth is translating into earnings growth. And yes, you are right. Although Where Food Comes From has been profitable for the last 7 years, it doesn't look like their earnings have grown as fast as their revenue and gross profit. And the biggest reason behind that is the company is constantly investing in its future. Beyond hiring personnel in advance for always growing and expanding, the company also has a track record of making a lot of small tuck-in acquisitions. This puts a lot of amortization and one-time legal expenses on the company's income statement as they roll up these smaller competitors, so that is also dampening the earnings. I don't mind the fact that they're not making consistent, massive profits now, because I think they're growing and trying to expand to get a lot bigger for the future. But even so, that being said, the company is piling up cash on its balance sheet. A few years ago, they finally paid off all their debt. Now they have have just been stacking up cash. I love companies that have a squeaky clean balance sheet like this. As you can see by my estimates, I'm guessing they'll end the year with about $5 million in cash. This is about 8% of the company's overall market cap that is just sitting in a bank account. These guys aren't going away anytime soon. Additionally, more cash than ever means they can make bigger acquisitions than ever with very limited dilution. So the fact that they look very expensive on an earnings, revenue, and gross profit basis based on the current business is a little bit misleading, because the company is going to continue to acquire smaller competitors and be able to compound its growth that way. Usually I would be very skeptical of a company with a roll-up strategy. I'm not a fan of this at all, but I'm a believer when I see execution. And John and his team have done an incredible job at executing these tuck-in acquisitions. For example, one of their last ones, Be Organic, is a specialty certifier for hydroponic and aquaponic crops and certifying them as organic. I think this is a massive growth market. I love the fact that Where Food Comes From has exposure to the indoor farming trend. Companies like Arrow Farms, Gotham Greens, and a company funded by Jeff Bezos called Plenty are putting millions and millions of dollars to build these massive greenhouses and grow food right next to cities. Now Where Food Comes From has exposure to that trend, and they have tucked the expertise and know-how to how to certify those different farms into their portfolio. So that's just one example of how they make a micro acquisition but get exposure to a huge trend. So what are they building here? Why am I so excited about this company? Sure Harvest, the acquisition they recently did, is in my opinion the most transformative and important we have ever seen from Where Food Comes From. This is a company that sells software. So now, yes, Where Food Comes From is going from going out to your farm and auditing what you do company to also selling farmers software company. The Sure Harvest provides software that allows growers to really accurately calculate, manage, and strategize the input of all of the different, fertilizers, water usage, crop yields, and all that kind of thing, and get data on the exact yield and efficiency of their farm to be able to not only improve from a revenue perspective what they're doing, but also documenting the sustainability practices of their farm at the same time. That is why Sure Harvest has partnered with the Almond Board of California, a bunch of wineries, and they're the leading software for these high value crops to start tracking their inputs and be able to benchmark themselves each year to get more and more sustainable. To give you guys some hardcore examples, Sure Harvest measures applied water use efficiency, habitat and biodiversity, energy use, nitrogen use, phosphorus use, and soil organic matter. Why is this so important? Because Where Food Comes From is going to adapt this software for a lot more than wine and almonds. They are going to put this in the beef industry and the pork industry and across all of the other food groups they manage. For those who don't know, this is really important to me. Beef and just generally livestock are probably the biggest single sector contributing to global greenhouse gas emissions. This is a huge problem for climate activists that they need to tackle, is to figure out how to reduce emissions from the beef and the pork and these livestock industries. I think the biggest key to doing that is educating consumers. Education is the catalyst for change. This is what is going to empower consumers to make informed decisions about their food. They're going to want to pay a premium for things that are more sustainable. This is a trend that's not going away. It's only getting more powerful by the day, and Where Food Comes From is in the sweet spot to be able to serve consumers this data. One of the biggest problems with beef farming, just to give you guys an example, is that if it's very concentrated and there's too many cows for the amount of land, that is one of the biggest things that can throw out of whack the sustainability of a given farm. So the fact that Where Food Comes From is not only going to be able to audit, the water usage, the fertilizer usage, but also going to be able to track, how crowded was this operations? What were the exact emissions, soil degradation of this farm this year? Did they improve next year? We can start tracking all of this. You could start to imagine massive food companies partnering with Where Food Comes From, like McDonald's. I don't think we've seen the end of that partnership, and to be able to start benchmarking the exact emissions and climate and environmental impact that their beef industry is having, and then they can start improving it year over year and telling that to consumers. I think this is exactly where everything is going. The food industry is just barely scratching the surface on the amount of data that we're going to start giving to consumers. Additionally, I said Whole Foods is one of their biggest customers. Yes, now Amazon has purchased Whole Foods. What do you think is going to happen here? I believe that we are going to see a massive positive impact from Amazon deciding to ramp up the growth in Whole Foods and trying to get consumers more and more data about their foods. And I think that means they're going to partner directly with Where Food Comes From. Where Food Comes From has already said they've met with Amazon on one of their most recent conference calls. So I think that is really exciting and promising too. So to sum it up, let's look at the valuation of the company. At a price of $2.90 per share, what it's trading at while I'm making this episode, and about 25 million shares outstanding, we're looking at a market capitalization of about 75 million. Given my estimates of revenue of 14.5 million this year, we're looking at about 5 times price sales. Given my estimate of about 900,000 in operating income this year, we're looking at a price EBIT ratio about 81x. Now, as I said, I do not think this is the core earnings of the company. They've already have a bunch of impact from acquisitions this year that are dampening that operating earnings. Additionally, I think the company is setting up for massive growth next year, something I didn't have a chance to get into in this this episode is China just opened up their market to import US beef. This means a ton of beef producers in the US are trying to get verified for all natural, for hormone free, so that they can be eligible to import to China. Where Food Comes From has a monopoly on the beef verification market and is getting an onslaught of business due to this. They are hiring in advance to prepare for that. That is why we're seeing earnings lag in the near term. And in a broader sense, that's just a micro example of how there's always sort of a drag on the near-term financials of the business model to set up for long-term growth. I'd argue that when Where Food Comes From slows down its growth, we're going to see a significant ramp in the company's ability to produce cash, and their operating earning margin will go up dramatically. And so that is why I'm kind of ignoring the fact that they don't have much earnings now, because I really think this is a growth story for the future. You know, last quarter they did about $4.5 million in revenue. If you annualize that, that's already 18 million in sales run rate as of last quarter. And you know, as you check out my chart, I'm only expecting 14.5 million this year. So that's what you get with growth companies. You can't look in the rear view mirror. You have to think about, what does this look like in the future? How is this business model evolving? How is the earnings power trending? These are the important ways to value the company. And I think Where Food Comes From in the long run can significantly grow revenue from here, not just because they're going to be verifying more and more producers, which will happen, but they're going to significantly ramp up the revenue per producer by auditing more certifications and by starting to sell them software via Sure Harvest. The companies that execute keep executing. Look at the track record of Where Food Comes From. They are growing revenue almost every single year, growing gross profit almost every single year. They continue to evolve and expand and get a little bit closer each day to fulfilling that vision of documenting where people's food comes from. I think this is a huge market. My generation is going to make this a hotter and hotter issue as we get more educated about the emissions of the food system. And the biggest key to fixing the emissions of the food system is to documenting the data first. And that is what Where Food Comes From is doing. That is why I think there's so much value here that I can't even fathom that's not showing up on the income statement. So I think in the long term, you know, this company could easily generate 5 to 10 million in earnings. You know, if you look at the market cap today, that means they could go multiples higher. You know, that's kind of in the back of my mind how I see the financials evolving. That's Hyperchange. I hope you guys got some crazy info on this. I think this is a fascinating little case study. I'm going to be following Where Food Comes From. I love the company. I love their mission. I think these guys are super important for the future of the food system. Love to know what you guys think. This is Hyperchange. Peace.